Hey, everyone. How are you doing tonight? Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you here with us. We're going to have a great conversation tonight. Should be a lot of fun. We do streams. We're doing streams every day now. So some nights we do it one way, some nights we do it another way. Tonight, I got some interesting plans, but I'm also here to answer your questions. So, let's just jump right into it.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you here with us. Should be an interesting conversation tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Couple business announcements just to start us all off. First things first, make sure that you're hitting that subscribe button and make sure you're hitting the notifications bell because people are getting unsubscribed against their wishes. The YouTube algorithms do that sometimes. So make sure that you are hitting the subscribe button. And then on top of that, make sure that you're hitting that notifications bell. And the reason you want to be sure that you're hitting that notifications bell is because of the fact that that a lot of people are not getting notifications when they want to receive them. So be sure to hit the notifications bell. Very, very important. Now, couple quick updates on things. The Center for Political Innovation, the CPI, our Socialist Education Project. We are having a conference in March in the New York City area. We're going to do another conference after that in the Pacific Northwest. So if you want to be involved in our activities, you can sign up on the website. Always good to have you all sign up on the website. And in addition to that, if you want to be a supporter of this community, if you want to get first dibs on a free copy of all the books that we put out, the best way to make sure that happens is to be a member of our Patreon community. So if you want to sign up on Patreon, I'm glad you asked. At this point, the CPI has 61 dues-paying members, 61. But that number is constantly rising. So we have 61 dues-paying members at this time, and the number continues to rise. Last night, there were a couple more people who joined. So it's actually higher than 61 now. It's probably 63 or 64 or something like that. But the number continues to rise. We relaunched at the beginning of November. It is now early December, and we are doing great. And we are having weekly Zoom calls with the general membership to discuss the activities of the organization. We're gradually coming back into life. One thing that we're doing around the country is we are doing these classes. We're helping people to give classes in their area along the lines of the Saxton lectures that I gave. I don't know if folks remember the Saxton lectures. Those are a series of 8 classes I gave in Saxton, Pennsylvania. It was a great event that we had, and it was great. And the classes that I gave were intended to be replicated. It was a series of concepts that are unique to the Center for Political Innovation. It's 8 classes to facilitate discussion and help people understand the main points of the Center for Political Innovation. They were made to be replicated. There's outlines available, and we're currently working with people to replicate them. There's people in different parts of the country that are looking to do one of the lectures themselves. And so we are helping that to happen. Elizabeth has stepped up to the plate. The Saxton lectures are very informative. You will know everything you need to know about Marxism after watching the Saxton lectures. Tara Reid tweeted out the Saxton lectures. She was very moved by the Saxton lectures. She particularly liked the Trotsky class. She found that to be very inspiring. There's been a number of people that really have learned a lot from the Saxton lectures, but they're going to get better because at our retreat in Kansas this summer, we had people do their own version of it. And, Tristan, he gave a great version of it. And there are other people who stepped up to the plate. They did great versions of the Saxton lectures, and other people learned to do them. And the idea is we want these to be the kind of the model for introduction to the Center for Political Innovation in our education, right? That someone can come and take all the Saxton lectures. It's just a day of classes, basically, in 8 parts. And then they'll know what we're all about, and that'll lay the basis for the outreach that we're doing. And that, it's kind of like the manual, the educational manual I wrote, right? This is another piece that is for educational purposes. We are city builders, and they've got study questions at the end of every session. This is designed for reading groups and such. The point of the Center for Political Innovation is to teach people these concepts and to get people to understand how things make sense in our time, because at this point, if you're just following from an old playbook, things don't make sense. And if you're following from wokeism that is against everything that socialism is about, they believe in degrowth, they support imperialist wars, you're not going to understand this. And we at the Center for Political Innovation, we have a modern, coherent understanding of the world situation, of the long-term crisis of overproduction, of the capitalist crisis, of the anti-imperialist countries, what went on in the 20th century. We have a coherent worldview that we put forward. And the idea is we don't want to keep it to ourselves. We want to educate people. We want people around the country who are interested in opposing the low-wage police state and want to stand up for the working class, want to oppose these wars. We want them to be armed with this kind of ideological training. That is the idea. So that's the purpose of the Saxton lectures. And people are stepping up to the plate, and they're going to be giving Saxton lectures in their area. So that's really, really awesome. I'm really, really excited that that is going on. Another great development, the podcast I've been doing with Jyoti and Harpal Brar, leaders of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, the CPGBML, otherwise known as the Communists, that will be continuing on Wednesday. Wednesday morning, I'll be waking up so that Harpal can come on from India and Jyoti can come on from Britain, and we're going to record a podcast, the next podcast in our series. That is going to be awesome. I am so excited about that. Really, really awesome. I'm very excited to be continuing that. So keep an eye out for that on Wednesday. That is going to be great. We're going to continue our podcast with Jyoti and Harpal Brar. I have great admiration for the work that they have done over the years. The Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, it comes out of the Indian Workers Association. For a long time, Harpal Brar was the leader of a Marxist organization called the Indian Workers Association. And then they merged into the Socialist Labor Party when Arthur Scargill, and the leader of the miners' strike in the 80s, when he quit the Labor Party. And eventually they formed the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. And I have been at international communist festivals, and they are always so much fun to hang out with. They publish so much great educational material. Jyoti and Ranjit and Harpal, and they got a good crew of folks there. They have a very, very educational platform, defending the history of the Soviet Union, defending People's Korea, defending the Chinese Revolution. They're a good group of folks. They were supportive of Libya when it was under attack. They actually went as far as saying, probably correctly, that Trump was the lesser evil in the 2016 elections in the United States. They are real anti-imperialists. And, they supported Brexit because workers, the European Union is bad for workers. They are not woke. They are legit anti-imperialists. They are legit, hardline Marxist-Leninists, and I like them, and they don't, their view isn't exactly my view, right? We have our whole thing about the city building tendency. We're excited about, Deng Xiaoping theory and the Sandinistas and Bolivarianism, but they are really the cream of the crop in the international communist movement. I'll tell you that much. And I'm so glad that they'll be back on here, and they're brave, and they take a lot of stands that a lot of people hate them for, and I think show that they are really in touch with the way the world works. They're in touch with the way the working class is going. Working people hate the woke stuff. Let me just be abundantly clear about that. Working people hate wokeness. They hate the political correctness. They hate the cancel culture. They hate of being scared to open their mouths. They hate the group of people that is constantly wagging its finger at them and trying to correct them. They hate people telling them that they should accept the economy being locked down and be happy about it. They hate having to pay higher gas prices just so we can bail out the Nazis in Ukraine. They hate everything that this Biden administration is doing. Look at the approval ratings of Biden. They are in the toilet, and that doesn't mean that everyone liked Trump or thought Trump was so good, but working people hate what Biden stands for. They hate the political correctness. They hate the censorship. They hate the condescending attitude that pours out of television, constantly disrespecting working class people, telling them that they need to go take gender studies at NYU and that they can't, they better start every conversation with what are your pronouns. Working class people can't stand this stuff. And what we need to make sure that working people understand is that this stuff has nothing to do with socialism. Absolutely nothing to do with socialism, right? This woke garbage has nothing to do with socialism, because that's what the right wing tells people. They tell them, oh, this is communism, right? This is communism, right? But it's not communism. It is absolutely not communism. This right wing, this stuff is from the highest levels of capital, the Ford Foundation and George Soros, the people that are going after Julian Assange, the people that are trying to get us into a new world war with Russia, the Atlantic Council, the World Economic Forum, the people pushing the low-wage police state and the permanent war agenda. They are not socialists in any conceivable way. If you want to see socialism, check out what is going on in China right now as their economy gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and more people are lifted up out of poverty, and the government is training young people to become engineers and scientists and develop new breakthroughs in computer technology and fusion energy. That's what socialism is about. Socialism is not degrowth pessimism, but rather socialism is an optimistic political movement. Socialism is an optimistic political movement based on unleashing growth and eliminating the artificial restraints put on human advancement and human intelligence by the irrationality of the capitalist market. That is what socialism and Marxism are all about. And that has been obscured, and that has been largely obscured. And 21st century socialism does not oppose Christianity. You go to Nicaragua, they call their system, the slogan that the government has everywhere is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. Oh, wow. Now, Lori Spencer is telling us that there's a vote on Elon Musk. I'm going to go vote. What is this vote? Right? Lori, thanks for staying on top of this. I'm going to click on this and I'm going to go vote on this poll. What is this poll we should all go vote on for Elon Musk? I'm not expressing opinion, but did promise to conduct this poll. Should Assange and Snowden be pardoned? Say yes. That's what I'm saying. Absolutely, they should be pardoned. I just hit yes. Very, very good. Very, very good. Thank you, Lori, for keeping us up to date on that. Elon Musk is really shaking things up, but Elon Musk, he's not a revolutionary. He's a billionaire. He's from the power structure, but he's doing this because this is a response to public opinion. They want to keep people on Twitter. And if Elon Musk doesn't come in there and shake things up and make it clear that Twitter is a place where anti-imperialist voices and people that are against the status quo can feel safe, then people are going to leave the platform. So Elon Musk is really doing Twitter a favor, in my opinion. He's helping Twitter because if not, there would be all other platforms that would be stepping up to the plate. So there you go. I guess I never really finished my opening spiel, but for those of you who may not be familiar, the way we do things here is I give opening remarks. I give my opening remarks, which are just, the opening comments that I want to make. And then after I give my opening remarks, we do the roll call, and then I answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, now is the time, or later, whenever you feel up to it, to send me a super chat question. Super chat questions are how we make the second half of the show lively. And people have been asking good questions lately. Last couple shows, we've had some great, great questions. So keep the questions rolling in. Always here to answer your super chat questions. That's how the second half of the show works. First half of the show is me talking. Then we have the roll call. We find out who's on the other side of the camera. And it's always a very diverse audience that we have here. It's really amazing, the audience that we have on these streams. And then after that, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. So think of good questions to ask because that is what really makes the beauty of our program here. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. If you'd like to become a member of the Center for Political Innovation and help our ongoing socialist education project and our upcoming conference in March and other things, you can join the Center for Political Innovation. If you want to be part, oh my gosh, it's Simon Miller's birthday. Happy birthday, Simon. I'm going to text Simon, a member of our community, happy birthday immediately. I had no idea. Wow. Happy birthday, Simon. I'm texting him happy birthday. That's great. Great news. And there we go. And then Red Illuminati says, think the economic collapse happens during the 2024 election season like in 2008? Oh, that's a good question. That's a great question. Very, very good question. Thank you for that, right? Today is my birthday, says Windy City Socialist. Wow, it's not only the birthday of Simon Miller, it is the birthday of Windy City Socialist. Wow, well, happy birthday to you, Windy City Socialist. I like your emoji there. You have the flag of the Donbass republics and a hammer and sickle, showing that you are a genuine communist, because the communists of the world stand with Russia and stand with the people of the Donbass regions that have joined with Russia. So you are in line with the global communist movement. Unlike the Western leftists that are confused and don't understand what's going on, you are a real communist, and you make that clear with the colors behind your emoji there. So good work for you. Good work. Good work. Yeah, as the super chats come in, I will continue writing them down. That's how this works. And in the second half of the show, I answer them. I want to mention, folks, that this is an ongoing project. These streams, right? I mean, you'll notice we're always trying to improve things. So last night was the 438th stream I've done. So when I went back and put the number on, I changed the title. Instead of saying Saturday Night Chat, I changed it to say some of the topics we talked about, because that's a suggestion that many people in the audience have been saying for a long time. Is I wish there was a way to find out, what topics you talked about. And so I'm now doing that. We're going to be changing the titles to reflect the content of the streams. I have to be careful with that, because if I'm too explicit about what we talk on here, YouTube is going to censor us. So we don't want to be completely crazy with that. But yeah, I'm starting to do that. And then we also have the clips channel. We have that. So, because of the fact we can't post multiple videos every day, because if we do, that'll ruin the notifications. And we already have trouble with people not getting the notifications. We have this other channel called Caleb Maupin Videos. And this channel is where I've been posting, clips from our streams. I'm just going to post this in the chat. This is called Caleb Maupin Videos. And we're up to about almost 500 subscribers on this other channel. Go and subscribe to that channel. Like I just posted when Bendu from American Autopsy was talking with me about movies. I just posted that clip on there. I posted the thing about tripe and American food on there. It's socialism or barbarism, and America chooses barbarism. Then we're going to lose. America chooses barbarism, then we are going to lose. I don't see it exactly that way. I don't think you understand the concept completely there, but I look forward to answering that in the second half of the show. So there you go. But yeah, the Caleb Maupin Videos channel, that's where we're posting things by category, because there's a lot of just little quick interactions where somebody asks me a quirky question, and bring it on with the quirky questions too. Everything you ask doesn't have to be some big political history thing or some deep economic analysis. Someone asked me about tripe, the food tripe, and that got me talking about food. We had a great clip on there. So if there's something quirky that's on your mind and you want to ask about it, by all means, go ahead. That's what we're here for. Shout out to Peter Coffin, who is in the chat. Peter Coffin is great. Peter Coffin has a new book that he just published on degrowth. And degrowth is so important. It is so important because that is really really the cutting edge question right now. The ultra rich, the wealthiest faction of the ruling class, is trying to rescue capitalism by degrowth. Now, they want to drive down living standards, reduce consumption, reduce energy output. They want to reduce the population. They have that demented advertisement on television in Canada promoting suicide, which we will not be showing on this stream, but it's horrifying. It's utterly horrifying. They are all out to destroy the human race right now and to drive down the population, to drive down living standards, to roll back technology. And as Peter Coffin points out, and I have pointed out too, if you want to understand what fascism is, and thank you, Babajid, I do appreciate it. Thank you, Babajid, for your super chat. The essence of fascism is degrowth. When capitalism enters a long-term crisis, the only way they can get the economy going again is to drive down living standards, reduce the population, and that's what fascism is. It is when the Western liberal capitalist societies collapse into illiberalism, into an authoritarian, tightly controlled capitalism, in which the living standards, anytime Peter is great. And I'm looking forward to a stream coming up, as Peter continues some of his great work. There's going to be some more collaboration between the two of us. Peter is doing great stuff. And this book on degrowth, I am really excited to get my hands on it. Peter's work around this stuff is really important. Fascism is when capitalism collapses into an illiberal state, and there is a tightly controlled economic system in which living standards are driven down. And historically, fascism has been right-wing. That's the name of the book. Less Sucks, Overpopulation, Eugenics, and Degrowth. It's a great book. And fascism is generally a right-wing movement, viciously anti-communist, but it's about saving capitalism with degrowth methods, by driving down living standards, by creating slave labor, by destroying the labor movement. That's what fascism is. And what we're seeing now is that often fascism maintains a pseudo-revolutionary aesthetic, right? It pretends to be against capitalism. It condemns capitalists. It demagogically attacks capitalists. And a lot of times that comes in the form of anti-Semitism or whatever. But at the end of the day, fascism is a movement intended to save capitalism, and it opposes historical progress. It believes that things were better before human technology advanced, and it's anti-human. And the new woke left, they are the foot soldiers of American fascism. They want to drive down living standards. Look what they're doing to the railroad union now. They're already teaming up against the railroad unions and saying that the railroad unions who won't go along with Biden's no strike law that just went forward, that what's going on with the railroad unions. Let's just comment on that. There are 4 railroad unions that represent 55% of American railroad workers. They are refusing to accept this deal that the railroad workers are being given, right? They have no paid sick leave now, and they want, some paid sick leave. And so we have the U.S. Congress, Democrats and Republicans, coming together to pass a law to outlaw them from going on strike. And then they have put forward a separate law that would give the railroad workers 7 paid sick days. So it's very clear what they're doing. They are outlawing a group of workers withholding their labor, taking away their right to strike. And when workers don't have the right to strike, at that point, their ability to make demands drastically decreases. There could be binding arbitration or something like that, but basically their ability to make demands decreases. However, the media is trying to spin it as the opposite of what it is. The media is trying to tell us, what's actually going on is that the Democrats are giving the workers, they're demanding those workers get their paid sick leave. False. That's a separate law that's not going to pass. The U.S. Senate isn't going to pass that, right? However, what is going to pass is the ban on the strike. And the Communist Party has been rallying its people to go pass this law and call Congress to support a strike-breaking law. right? I mean, that's basically what they're doing. This is another Taft-Hartley, law, a law that forbids railroad workers from going on strike because it would hurt the economy and make Biden, less and less popular. And the Communist Party is supporting it on the grounds of, hurting the economy will it'll help fascism because, Republicans are fascists. And it's utterly appalling. I mean, to see the Communist Party USA supporting a law that would take away the right of railroad workers to go on strike and then misrepresenting it and saying it's about giving the workers their 7 days sick leave, which is actually not what the law is. That's a separate law, and that's not going to pass in the Senate. So it's utterly shocking to see the Communist Party that claims to be a party of working class people utterly abandoning railroad workers, right? And this is a party, not only do they, they cling to the Democratic Party, but they cling to the labor bureaucracy too. They cling to the AFL-CIA, the AFL-CIO. They cling to them. And you would think that the labor bosses would at least understand that taking away their right to strike basically makes unions null and void. But the leaders of the AFL-CIA or the AFL-CIO are so closely tied in with the Democratic Party that they're not sticking up for those railroad workers. This is a horrendous moment. This is ultimately the Democratic Party cannot continue to claim to be the party of the working class when they do something like this. And we're seeing that the Democratic Party is more and more evolving into just the party of the establishment. Whatever the establishment is pushing. Okay. How is China a socialist economy with a free market? Okay. Happy to answer that. All right. And they're taking away the right to strike. It's utterly horrifying what they're doing. And thank you for the question, Babajid. And not a Freudian slip at all, right? In the 1950s, there was a law called the Taft-Hartley Law, and it was followed up by the Taft-McCarran Law. And that law forbid any communist from holding office in a labor union. And after that law was passed, at that point, the United Auto Workers went into business with the CIA, and they set up something called the Solidarity Center or the Solidarity House. And that was basically the CIA running labor unions around the world to fight against communism. And they hired Jay Lovestone, the Communist Party traitor, the guy who invented the term American exceptionalism, or actually it was Stalin invented the term to call him out, the American exceptionalist, Jay Lovestone, the traitor to the Communist Party. They hired him to run the CIA's labor work, and it was all facilitated by the United Auto Workers. And you can read all about this, the Solidarity House, the Solidarity Center. It is an operation to coordinate labor activism against communism and against the Soviet Union to destabilize China, and it's facilitated by the United Auto Workers, the UAW. And that since the communists were kicked out of the labor unions during the 1950s, and since the labor movement became dominated by labor fakers and sellouts who don't believe in class struggle, they believe that the workers and the bosses ultimately somehow have the same interests. Ever since that time, the labor unions have been heavily involved with American intelligence. Now, that's not to say that the American, capitalist class doesn't want to reduce their power and weaken them, but they haven't been putting up a strong fight. They haven't put up a very, very strong, effective fight, effectively. And if there was ever a time for labor militancy, it would be now. Right. I mean, it would be now for workers, fast food workers to have sit down strikes and occupy the McDonald's, barricade the doors of McDonald's and say, if you don't give us a union contract, we're not letting the doors of this store open. We're going to keep all your property in here. A sit down strike. Imagine what a sit down strike would do, in America, in the fast food industry, or imagine what a sit down strike would do at a Walmart. If the labor movement actually had that militant class struggle attitude, a lot of things could change. The problem is that it doesn't. I remember, I'll just mention this, when around, I think 2013, 2014, 2012, there was this big push by the labor union bureaucrats, the labor bosses, for this campaign they called Fast Food Forward. And they were organizing strikes of fast food workers. And it was fake. It was fake. It wasn't real. I went to cover these protests, and they'd have a protest out in front of a McDonald's, and all the labor union bureaucrats would be out there, and there'd be politicians there giving speeches, and then they'd have like three or four fast food workers from another part of the city, from Queens or something. And you'd go into the McDonald's they were protesting out in front of, and the workers wouldn't be on strike. The workers would have no idea what was going on out there. It wasn't really a strike of fast food workers. It was a Democratic Party rally to raise the minimum wage, right? It wasn't really about workplace action on the job. It wasn't fast food workers actually organizing and demanding better pay. It was the opposite. It was simply a matter of the labor bureaucracy having rallies for the Democrats to claim they want to raise the minimum wage. It was a pep rally, French equivalent to Lenin or Luxembourg in the 1900s. That's a strange question. It was a pep rally, as Red Illuminati says it. And yeah, it was fake. It was staged. It was not real labor action on the part of actual fast food workers striking for better wages. The labor bureaucracy doesn't want to take that kind of a risk. That would be too much risk. Instead, they just organize these pep rallies for the Democrats. It's pretty unbelievable. But, these railroad unions, to their credit, they say they will strike anyway. Even though it's illegal, they say that they will strike regardless. And that takes guts on their part, right? The railroad labor bureaucracy is more radical than the Communist Party, right? This railroad union, a lot of their leaders are probably Republicans. But they're more radical than the Communist Party. The Communist Party wants to support a strike-breaking law. The Communist Party says everything to support Biden. But this railroad workers union that endorses Democrats, but a lot of the rank and file are Republicans. And I think historically, some of those unions have even been Republican aligned. They are more radical than the Communist Party. They're sticking up for their members. So, I mean, this is pretty unbelievable. Someone's asking, can you be charged with a crime for striking? Yes, you can. In New York City, we have what's called the Taylor Law. And no public employee in New York City and New York State can go on strike. And so if teachers go on strike in New York State, they go to jail. When there was a transit workers strike here in the city in 2006, I believe, was it 2003, maybe 2003, 2006? There was a transit workers strike around holiday time in New York. The leader of the labor union was a Haitian guy, Toussaint was his name, and they imprisoned him. They threw him in jail for striking, for leading a transit workers strike. So yes, they do. They do put people in jail for striking. This does happen. The leaders of labor unions, they are locked up. Yeah, for striking. The courts will fine them, etc. The penalties are not generally too harsh, because they don't want to generate a huge amount of outcry. But yes, to break strikes. And in some of the southern states, they have been particularly vicious. There have been teachers' strikes in like South Carolina and Florida, where they have imprisoned every teacher who goes on strike. I mean, it's been particularly awful. But yeah, in this case, in New York City, when the transit workers strike happened and they shut down the trains in New York City during the holiday season, they ended up, and the workers won. I think that, immediately forced the city to the table. They gave them what they wanted, but then they threw the leader, he had to go to prison, I think, for a couple of weeks or something like that. Yeah, they do, and they talk about strike-breaking injunctions. The Taft-Hartley law, which is a federal law, gives the president of the United States the right to order workers to go back to work. With the Taft-Hartley law, if there's a strike, the president can declare, he can declare a cooling off period is what they call it. And the president can just show up and say, you know what, you all have to go back to work. Why? Because I'm the president and I said so. And if you don't, then you go to jail. And it really goes to show you all their free market garbage they don't believe in, right? Because what is a strike? A strike is withholding your labor, right? The idea of a strike, right, is that the worker sells his labor to the capitalist. The capitalist pays him a wage in exchange for his work. And what is a strike other than a worker saying, okay, if you're not going to give me what I want for my work, I am going to withhold my labor, right? And usually a strike happens when a contract has run out, right? The idea is that, the contract that the workers have is run out, and the bosses don't want to negotiate the right contract. And so the workers withhold their labor. And I mean, how can you outlaw such a thing, right? I mean, it's supposed to be the free market, right? But suddenly the free market goes out the door, and they jail teachers and they jail transit workers. They're threatening to jail railroad workers. And it's pretty unbelievable. It's pretty unbelievable. And it's pretty shocking here to see this kind of behavior and to see the so-called communist party supporting it, because at the end of the day, they're loyal to wokeism. They're not loyal to the working class, and they're very hostile to their working class members. There was somebody in the Communist Party, someone who was around the CPI a little bit. He was in the Communist Party, and his job is he was in Texas. He worked on an oil, he worked in an oil rig. And he told me about how people in the Communist Party were saying they weren't comfortable with him around because he works in fossil fuels, and that's right wing. Like, this is a ridiculous group of people. I mean, this is not a communist organization. This is a woke organization. That's ridiculous. What kind of, the Communist Party of the 1930s would have been happy to have oil rig workers sign up to join their organization. But the Communist Party is so invested in the Democratic Party and the, oil, that's right wing, that's not good for the environment, that they were hostile to this young guy because he worked in an oil rig to pay his bill and feed his family. It's just unbelievable, and so, we've seen this kind of thing before, but this railroad workers strike, I mean, it's probably going to happen. They're going to do it in defiance of the law, which is to their credit. So we'll have to see how that goes down. But there's a couple other news items I thought I might mention here in my opening remarks. One thing, I don't know if people saw this, but I saw in the Washington Times, right, that Kamala Harris's staff, she just keeps losing people. Did you see this? I don't know. I don't know if people have seen the latest, but I'll let you know about this, right? So Kamala Harris's communication director has departed, right? So people just keep quitting Kamala Harris's staff. They keep walking away from working for her because it's just so unbelievable. It's just, she is not a fun person to work for. She ain't a good boss. And I'll read you the article here. I'll read part of it at least, right? We've got Vice President Kamala Harris's communication director will leave her office in latest staff exit. Jamal Simons, who held the position for about a year, is departing next month to move to New York with his family. Now, he says, working with Vice President Harris has been an honor and a privilege. And I'm so thankful for the confidence she put me in. I will miss this fantastic team more than anything, he told Politico. But Mr. Simons was hired last year after Ms. Harris struggled to retain the staff of her first year and saw a very high turnover rate and reports of a negative work environment. So, this is continued confirmation of what I wrote. Before I wrote the infamous BreadTube book, I wrote this book, right? That's what I did during the pandemic. I wrote 2 books during lockdown. First I wrote Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. And basically, because some information was provided to me by somebody who knew Kamala Harris's father, and, they said, there's a story here. This woman could be president, right? All it takes is Joe Biden to choke on a chicken bone or fall down the steps again or, have a heart attack, and this woman's our president. And she's psychotic. She's deranged, right? She has, some intense trauma, and there are people around her who know how to manipulate her, and they have gotten her into the position that she's in because she is easy to manipulate. She is an unstable, dangerous person, and they have put her in the position because they know how to push her buttons and they know how to manipulate her. And because of that, and because of the details about her father and all of that, I decided to write this book. And this book created quite a splash. I know that her staff has a copy of this book. So Mr. Simons, who just quit, he knows about this book. He's at least seen a copy of it. They know about this book. They know that this book exists. And I basically used the life of Kamala Harris and the unique information I had about Kamala Harris and her relationship with her father and her origins in the civil rights and why Tulsi Gabbard went after her and the divisions in the ruling class and the Hillary Clinton faction and all of that. I used that to make 3 different points. And this book was a big hit. And if you look on Amazon, this book has actually pretty good reviews. But I wrote this book. I wrote it in September. She was elected vice president in November. And since then, everything that I have written in this book has been proven to be correct. First things first, her father did not come to her inauguration because the two of them don't speak to each other. Next, people working for her have said she's a nut job and have been quitting in droves. She won't take interview prep. She verbally berates all the people who work for her. She has meltdowns. She refuses to prep for interviews. This is Kamala Harris, right? She's a very, very, very hard to work with person. The American people don't like her. I wrote this book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, and it has gotten overwhelmingly good reviews. And people have said that, I drew from the history of Marxism. I drew from Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis. I drew from research about the city she grew up in, Berkeley, and the connections that her family has, and, the Rainbow Sign, African-American Community Center that she volunteered at and spent her time with. And I mean, I did some pretty good research. It's not a biography of Kamala Harris. I'm using Kamala Harris to make 3 important political points. And this book has gotten quite a few good reviews. I just thought I'd mention that in light of the Kamala Harris drama. I thought I might throw that out there once again, because, the Bread Tube book made a big splash. That was the book that made the biggest splash. And so this was before the Bread Tube book. There was the Kamala Harris book. And I'm working on another book right now, right? We got to spread the word. We got to challenge the power structure. We got to get the information out there. So I just wanted to mention that. Couple other things. I don't know if you saw, but in Honduras, at this point, they have suspended constitutional rights for 30 days because they are dealing with serious gang warfare. Criminal organizations are torching buses and kidnapping people for ransom. So they have suspended constitutional rights, and they're sending the federal police into different areas. Honduras has just been devastated. 2009, the coup that was carried out by the United States, where they overthrew President Manuel Zelaya, the socialist. And then they brought in Micheletti, the leader of the military, and they brought in various right-wing governments. Now, the left is kind of back in power, but it's not a radical left. It's kind of a U.S. government-approved left. They sent Kamala Harris to the inauguration. They haven't implemented any dramatic socialist reforms, but it's supposed to be this leftist government that's back in power. But things are still very difficult, and the instability in the country continues. Very high murder rate. It's almost as high as Haiti's murder rate. The conditions in Honduras have been particularly bad as a result of U.S. meddling in the country. But if you compare Honduras to Nicaragua is doing astoundingly better. Living standards in Nicaragua have been going up. Their micro-entrepreneurship program and their socialist economic policies have really made life better for the people there. Compare the socialist government of the Sandinistas to Nicaragua. To the government of Nicaragua, to the government of Honduras, or the government of Guatemala, for that matter. Guatemala has a free market, right-wing, libertarian, neoliberal government, and it's been, its situation has been horrendous. The economics of the country, it's been devastated. People are fleeing. But socialism in Nicaragua has done astounding things to raise up the population. So I wanted to point that out as well. Yeah, that's kind of what's on my mind for tonight. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to mention in my opening remarks. Keep the super chats rolling in. That's what makes the second half of the show so good, right? Is your super chats. There's different things going on. I see Iran. Reports indicate that Iran has outlawed, has gotten rid of their morality police in response to the widespread protests in the country. They have abolished their morality police. That's the report, not confirmed, but that makes sense, right? The population is upset. Is there such thing as unproductive labor, right? Does it make a difference? That's actually a good question. And I can answer that for sure. So there you go. But yeah, we've got different things we can talk about here, but yeah. So I wanted to mention about Iran and the protests. And yeah, the United States is fomenting those protests, and they've arrested some Mossad agents that were involved in, helping those protests happen. But at the same time, it seems like there is widespread unrest within the Iranian country, within the Islamic Republic, and so the government is kind of taking measures to try and appease some of the anger of the people. They don't like this morality police, so they're adjusting that. That's important to note. And there you go. All right, folks. Why don't we now do the roll call? Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you, names and locations, and then I'll start answering super chat questions. Just a laid back stream for tonight. So names and locations. Let's find out who's on the other side of the camera. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? All right. We got Maupin time in Scotland. Happy birthday, Nate in Chicago. We got JT24 from Mississippi. We got Ryan in Oakland. David Rennie in Ontario. Tristan in Maryland. John C. in Los Angeles. Rice in Adelaide, Australia. Jade in Maryland. Christian in Bergen County. Meredith and Quinn in Eatonville, Washington. Tucson, Geraldine. St. David's, Bermuda, Steve and Ann in North Georgia, Upper Peninsula, Michigan, Timoshenko in St. Louis, Neil Fraser in Hong Kong, Bob Troy in New York, Upper Peninsula, Viking Dave in UP, Michigan, Yada Yisrael in Chicago, Bob Troy in New York, Wesley in the People's Republic of Manchester, Alex from Brazil, Pulteney, Vermont, Jared from Virginia. Jared from Virginia is with us. Very, very, very good. John McCarthy in Chicago is with us. Welcome, John McCarthy. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. We got Peter in Florida. We got Charles from New York City. We got Red Chilean in Concepcion. Jason in northern Georgia. All right. We got Juan in Italia, right? Martin in Ireland, David in China, Chester in England, Northern Virginia, Johnny Blaze. Very, very good. We got Richard Sawicki, and he's in Southern California. We got Cleveland Pirate Alex. Welcome, Cleveland Pirate Alex. So glad to have you here with us tonight. Names and locations. We're seeing here who is on the other side of the camera. Names and locations. We got Josh Knorr in St. Louis. Very good. Josh Knorr. Who else do we have? We've got Neil Fraser in Hong Kong, right? We've got David in China, right? We've got Surround, Maddie and Surround. Welcome from Surround. Very, very good. Glad to have you. All right. So should I start answering super chat questions now? All right. If you got more super chat questions, by all means, shoot them my way. First question I've got is from Jason, and he's asking about Land of Idols, the book by Michael Parenti, my takeaway. Michael Parenti wrote 2 books on the media. The first is called Make Believe Media, Invented Reality, Make Believe Media, something like that. And then the second one is called The Land of Idols. I believe I read the first one, Make Believe Media or Inventing Reality, and I didn't read that one. I did hear a lecture that Michael Parenti gave about Land of Idols, like themed on that book. And if I remember correctly, that lecture, that the second book, Land of Idols, was more about culture. It wasn't so much a critique of the bias in the media. If I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've heard that presentation, but it was more about celebrity worship. It was more about advertising. Oh, thank you, Frank. Always appreciated. Always appreciated. It was more about advertising, celebrity culture, the way they talk about events, the way they kind of train the audience to perceive things. I think that's what it was more about, if I remember correctly. But it's been a while since I've read that particular volume. So there you go. Oh, we got William from England. Welcome, William. And Work in Progress in Ottawa. So there we go. Now, the next question we've got is from Pella. And Pella is asking, do you think that the economic collapse happens in 2024 election season like the 2008 election? It's possible. It's very possible something like that could happen. You wonder if they will have the ability to do that, right? Because, the economic collapse of 2008, how much was it timed? How much was it timed? That's a fair question. Because at the end of the day, the economic collapse was going to happen. It was going to happen. The U.S. economy was going to have a major downturn in 2008. And it was rooted in the fact that the spending power of the U.S. public had vastly decreased, and that the mechanisms through which the U.S. public was being artificially motivated or artificially enabled to continue spending, especially in the housing market with the mortgages, those mechanisms were being dried up. Like, they just couldn't do it anymore, right? And that, the analogy that I've often heard is people have said it's almost like, if you got all the smartest geologists and scientists together, could they prevent a volcano from erupting? No. Right. And people said, well, how could all the smartest people in the world have dropped the ball in 2008 and let that financial crash happen again? Right. The smartest geologists in the world cannot prevent a volcano from going off. And that it was rooted in the fact that the spending power of the U.S. public had vastly decreased. And that at the same time, the artificial mechanisms that kept the U.S. public spending had been run dry. And on top of that, it was rooted in the fact that, it was a big economic fallout because there had been these artificial mechanisms that had prevented a market correction from happening for a long time, right? When the public's living standard is going down, right, and the cost of living continues to go up, eventually you're going to have a crisis of overproduction where people just can't afford to keep buying the products anymore. The problem was that, we had first, starting in the early 90s, there was something that they called a jobless recovery, where in the early 90s, there was an economic downturn. Remember, as Bill Clinton was coming into office, there was an economic downturn, and the economy somehow got going again without an increase in jobs. And that was something that hadn't been seen before. But Wall Street had figured out a mechanism, whereas their Dow Jones Industrial Average and their profits could continue to rise without a jobs increase among the U.S. public. When you have an economic downturn, there tends to be a lot of layoffs. People lose their jobs. And then when the economy gets going again, when you have a recovery, more people get jobs. And you had a jobless recovery. And then in 2000, under Bush, you also had a jobless recovery. And then in 2008, you had a jobless recovery. And that was this bizarre ability of the market to continue going up without employment increasing among the public. And that showed that there's been an effort to insulate Wall Street. One of the big things that was widely talked about in 2008 was derivatives. It was the fact that a lot of the way Wall Street guys make money is they make a bet on a bet, right? It's that it is these very, very complicated mechanisms where people are betting money on what the market is going to do and what stock goes up half a point and all of this. And all of that kind of thing was going on. And there was no real value being created. There were all of these different loopholes created for money to be made out of money, money being made out of more money. And it was not physical economy. You didn't have real production increasing. The infrastructure of the country was falling apart. Living standards were falling. Production and actual employment among the population was decreasing. But with all of this fluff, all of this speculation, which is more or less what it is when you bet on things, all of this speculation, they were able to continue all kinds of wealth being created for Wall Street guys, when in reality there was no concrete economic growth going on. The living standards of the population were not going up. The infrastructure of the country was falling apart. Production was decreasing. But all this wealth, all this money was just appearing in the economy because of speculation. And that is the financialization of capital, and everything being tied in with the stock market, and the stock market increasingly having nothing to do with the reality of economic conditions on the ground. That situation is something that was widely commented on at the time. Now, the 2008 financial crash happened at a time that was very, very convenient for Barack Obama. It happened just as he was running for president. That summer of 2008, the economy crashed and Barack Obama marched in to be the savior. And you have to wonder, how was that timed necessarily? I mean, the economy had been getting worse and worse under Bush. There had been a downturn just as Bush had taken office, and then 9/11 happened, and then he invaded Iraq, and then things seemed to be kind of recovering. And then 2008, everything went to hell. And you had this dramatic crash that happened. And Alan Greenspan was dragged before Congress and basically admitted, all my life I thought firms would regulate themselves, and I thought all this easy credit I was inventing would work, and I guess it doesn't work. And the free market stuff I've been led to believe my whole life, guess it doesn't work. Alan Greenspan was the protege of Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand is, the author of The Fountainhead. She's the author of Atlas Shrugged. She promoted, it's Nietzsche. It's the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche watered down for dumb people, right? Nietzsche is all about philosophy and might makes right, and that he wants the law of the jungle, right? Ayn Rand was a dumber version of Nietzsche, written for business majors and people that want to believe in the ethics of capitalism and want to deregulate the market, right? It was, Nietzsche's philosophy was all about, great individuals persecuted by society and people becoming more like barbarians and inner strength and the blonde beast and, all this stuff. Whereas Ayn Rand, it's just a very blatant defense of capitalism. Please talk about the role of the finance banking had in the transition from feudalism to mercantilism to capitalism, and how countries that lack natural resources would adopt to socialism. All right. Okay, so first question is the role of finance capital transition feudalism to mercantilism to capitalism. The second part of it is, how do countries without natural resources transition to socialism? Very good. I put that on the list of questions. But yeah, how much was the 2008 financial crisis? How much was it planned? How much were they sitting there and saying, all right, we're going to pull out all the stops so that things crash at that time? We don't know. Right. That does happen. The crash of the Asian markets that happened in 1999 was very coordinated. So in the 1990s, China's economy was, they were opening up to foreign investment, and China was booming and getting stronger. And the USA had allowed what was called the Asian Tiger countries, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, to build themselves up. And these were Bonapartist regimes, and it was heavily state controlled. And this, the idea that it was somehow an example of the free market is ridiculous. I mean, South Korea, they built up state-run industries. Taiwan, the government, it would be like private companies completely facilitated by the state, government subsidies, and that these kind of authoritarian governments in Taiwan and in South Korea and in Singapore had built up very strong economies with state control. It was Bonapartist governments. And these countries, originally they were built up by the United States as kind of barriers against communism. The idea was that, the populations of these countries might revolt if living standards didn't go up, and the USA didn't want communism to spread to South Korea and to spread, it didn't want Taiwan to rejoin with the Chinese mainland. So the USA forced Japan to lend money to South Korea, and it, sold military hardware and kind of permitted Park Chung-hee and other various strong men in Asia to build up their economies. But then as China started rising, the USA started to get threatened by China's rise. And these strongmen, they couldn't control them. Lee Kuan Yew was the strongman of Singapore. He was a very effective, right-wing nationalist, not a communist, not a Marxist, a very authoritarian leader, very liberal use of the death penalty, just a very authoritarian leader. But he started acting more and more independently. Singapore is very friendly to China, very friendly to the People's Republic of China. And Lee Kuan Yew started kind of giving the middle finger to the United States. There were many times the Bill Clinton administration was trying to tell Lee Kuan Yew and Singapore what to do, and they said, we're going to do what we want, screw you. And, similar things were done in Taiwan, and similar things were done, in South Korea. And then we saw, Park Chung-hee, the leader of South Korea, was basically killed by the United States. I mean, that's what it looks like to me. The head of the security services shot him in the head in his own home. I mean, and that was pretty clear. It was at a time that the U.S. government was cracking down on Koreagate, which was, the role of Korean businessmen in American politics. And so there was a crackdown, and that there was a situation where the Asian tiger countries were acting more and more independent. So in 1999, all of these American investors and American banks had a coordinated pullout of their money. And it was done all of a sudden. It was a coordinated pullout. And the American companies all pulled their money out at once. And the crash of the Asian markets in 1999 was timed. I mean, there was going to be some kind of economic downturn anyway. The USA wasn't going to continue investing over there and all that. But it was very much a foreign policy maneuver where they coordinated U.S. investors en masse pulling their money out of the Asian markets. And it devastated. It had a dramatic negative impact on the Asian economy. So they do things like that, where they do crash economies in coordination, right? Not everything in the economy is natural, but you have to remember that there are different interests among the ruling class. They want different things. They have different ideas. They have different perspectives. They have different short-term and long-term economic interests. So getting a group of capitalists with different corporations and different businesses to all agree to do something at once is a very hard thing to do. And it's also illegal. They do have laws against that. Price fixing is illegal. Things like, getting together and saying, all right, we're all going to move our money here. We're all going to move our money there. That's illegal. You can't do that. Things like insider trading and all that. They have rules to make sure that such things don't happen. But they did do a planned crash of the Asian markets. So these things do happen to some degree or other. So, was it timed with Obama, or was it that basically all the economic forecasters realized that there was a downturn coming up and they said, all right, let's get our savior. Let's have our savior, on a white horse ready to ride into office, on a white horse and save the day. Right. Let's have him all set to do that at the right time. It may have been something more like that. But regardless, it was certainly to the benefit of Obama, and it certainly seemed timed very well. And they could have a similar operation being planned, but who would go along with it? Right now, the U.S. ruling class is far more divided than it was in 2008. There was big divisions when Obama came into office, but those divisions only intensified. So, the idea that they would be able to get all of the Wall Street guys to do that all at once is very hard to think, especially when there's so many divisions in the ruling class. So there you go. Now, this next question is, if it's socialism or barbarism and America chooses barbarism, then we are going to lose. Okay. Well, you need to understand what Rosa Luxemburg was actually saying with her socialism or barbarism statement. I'm going to read it to you, right? I'm going to read you the context of what she actually wrote, because it wasn't like it was a choice. This is not what she wrote. Right? Socialism or barbarism, right? A quote by Rosa Luxemburg. I'm going to pull it up. It's from the Junius pamphlet. The Junius pamphlet was an anti-war pamphlet that Rosa Luxemburg wrote during World War I. She was a German. She was living in Germany, and she was a Marxist, and she was opposed to World War I. And the German Social Democratic Party supported World War I and sold out the workers. So she wrote this theoretical Marxist pamphlet called the Junius pamphlet. This anti-war pamphlet opposing World War I. And it's very well written. It's very poetic, and it's a polemic about the sellout leadership of the labor movement that supported World War I. And that pamphlet is where the quote about socialism or barbarism comes in. So I'm going to read it to you. She wrote, I'll actually read you the 3 paragraphs that it comes from. Socialism is the first popular movement in world history that has set itself the goal of bringing human consciousness and thereby free will into play in the social actions of mankind. That's a heavy statement right there. Socialism is the first movement in history that wants human beings to direct the economy and not have the market and the chaos of the market and nature be in control, but it seeks to put human will into play in the social actions of mankind. For this reason, Friedrich Engels designated the final victory of the socialist proletariat a leap of humanity from the animal world into the realm of freedom. That's in Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. That ultimately, socialism is about realizing our humanity, right? That the animal only interacts with his environment, but man makes the environment serve him. And that socialism is the ultimate triumph of human beings over the environment, right? It's they get free from scarcity. They're no longer dependent and at the mercy of nature. They have absolute control, and so much abundance is created. There can't be any famines or anything. Socialism is the ultimate freedom of humans from any animalistic existence. This leap is also an iron law of history, bound to the thousands of seeds of prior torment-filled and all too slow development. But this can never be realized until the development of complex material conditions strikes the incendiary spark of consciousness will in the great masses. So meaning that we won't be ready to have socialism until the conditions drive forward the consciousness that enables people to become revolutionary. The victory of socialism will not descend from heaven. It can only be won by a long chain of violent tests of strength between old and new powers. The international proletariat, under the leadership of the Social Democrats, will thereby learn to try and take history into its hands instead of remaining a will-less football. It will take the tiller of social life and become the pilot to the goal of its own history. Right? She's writing that Marxism is essentially working class people figuring out how to insert themselves, how to insert themselves into the political process. So there we go. And so then she goes on. Friedrich Engels once said, bourgeois society stands at the crossroads, either transition to socialism or regression into barbarism. What does regression into barbarism mean for our lofty Europe? Until now, we have all probably read and repeated these words thoughtlessly without suspecting their fearsome seriousness. A look around us at this moment shows what the regression of bourgeois society into barbarism means. This war is a regression into barbarism. The triumph of imperialism leads to the annihilation of civilization. That's heavy. But she's watching World War I. She's watching World War I happen, and the poison gas attacks and the mowing down of people and these battles where hundreds of thousands of people die in a day, like the Battle of the Somme. She's watching this, and she's saying this is humanity descending into a state of utter barbarism. People are acting like savages. This is a regression. Imperialism is not an advance, but with modern technology, people are acting the most barbaric and savage, pre-civilized ways, right? I got you. Yeah, I got you. I'll keep that in mind when I answer your question. And she's saying that human civilization, they're acting in the most pre-civilized ways. The triumph of imperialism leads to the annihilation of civilization. She writes, at first this happens sporadically for the duration of a modern war, but then when the period of unlimited war begins, it progresses towards its inevitable consequences. Today, we face the choice exactly as Friedrich Engels foresaw it a generation ago. either the triumph of imperialism and the collapse of all civilization, as in ancient Rome, depopulation, desolation, and degeneration, a great cemetery, or the victory of socialism. That means the conscious active struggle of the international proletariat against imperialism and its method of war. This is a dilemma of world history, and either or, that the scales are wavering before the decision of the class-conscious proletariat. The future of civilization and humanity depends on whether or not the proletariat resolves manfully to throw its revolutionary broadswords into the scales. In this war, imperialism has won. Its bloody sword of genocide has brutally tilted the scale toward the abyss of misery. The only compensation for all the misery and all the shame would be if we learn from the war how the proletariat can seize the mastery of its own destiny and escape the role of lackey to the ruling class. Dearly bought is the modern working class's understanding of its historical vocation. Its emancipation as a class is sown with fearful sacrifices, a veritable path to Golgotha. The June days, the sacrifice of the Commune, the martyrs of the Russian Revolution, a dance of bloody shadows without number. All fell on the field of honor. They are, as Marx wrote about the heroes of the Commune, eternally enshrined in the great heart of the working class. Now millions of proletarians of all tongues fall upon the field of dishonor, fratricide, lacerating themselves while the song of the slave is on their lips. This too we are not spared. We are like the Jews that led Moses through the desert. But we are not lost. We will be victorious if we have not unlearned how to learn. And if the present leaders of the proletariat, the social democrats, do not understand how to learn, they will go under to make room for people capable of dealing with a new world. Those are very, very powerful statements from Rosa Luxemburg. And it's from her Junius pamphlet. And she's basically saying that the rise of imperialism, the dominance of finance capital, and the spreading of capitalism all over the world to hold back economic development as the Germans and the British and the Americans and the French and the Austrians are colonizing the world, has ripped away from has ripped away from capitalism and European civilization the mask of civilization. I mean, they're no longer acting like civilized people, and that they're basically being reduced to savages as they gun down whole societies, as they beat down and colonize and exploit people, and that the rise of imperialism stripped away the civilized masks of European civilization, right? And this is something I've reflected on many times. This is an important point, that at the end of the day, right, feudalism was a bad system, and we don't want to restore feudalism. But in feudalism, everything was dressed up in ritual. In feudalism, everyone had a place. Everyone was born. You were a serf. You were a landowner. You were a soldier. You were a craftsman. Everyone was born into their rank, and there was all this elaborate ritual and ceremony, and the knight and the castle and the king with his divine right to rule, and everything seemed so organized, and it was very unfair. It was very hierarchical. It was very corrupt, but there was this elaborate mystical chivalry that held society together. And Marx, in the Communist Manifesto, talks about how capitalism was the beginning of sweeping that all away. And no more is there any beautiful rank, and no more is there this mystical belief about the king and the commoner, and all that's swept away. It's just about, I want to make money. I want to get rich. What, you're poor? Well, you work for me. You work for me, I give you this wage. And that capitalism makes it just about callous cash payment. And if the employer has no obligation to his employees other than to pay them the wages, and the employee can't expect anything from the employer except the little that he can get away with, and this is the beginning of it. But then Rosa Luxemburg, in that passage we just read, She's describing how as capitalism moves into its monopoly stage of imperialism that Lenin wrote about, it's becoming even less civilized, right? And they're mobilizing workers to slaughter whole villages, to hold back economic development in the countries that they are colonizing, and to form blocks of countries, Germany and Austria blocking against the British and the Americans and the French, and to hate each other on the basis of nationality, and to go out and die by the millions. 20 million workers died in World War I, 20 million people. And the poison gas, the chemical weapons, right? And all of that all of the mask of civilization was being pulled off of Europe. And Europe was turned into just a giant battlefield of senseless killing. And Rosa Luxemburg is comparing this to the fall of the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire was awful, obviously. But what replaced the Roman Empire? Something worse. Life expectancy across Europe went down. Europe depopulated. It took 1,100 years for Europe to maintain the population level it had had at the height of the Roman Empire. The height of human beings decreased after the fall of the Roman Empire. Nutrition intake decreased. And the Roman Empire was bad, but it was replaced by chaos, barbarism, where you had less and less stability. And less and less stability and less productivity. And you got, someone says 100,000 years of darkness. You had a dark age. The reason they called it the dark age was because they were not at the productive level that Europe had been at the time of the Roman Empire. And all the science and all the advances in technology that had taken place under the Roman Empire were rolled backwards. It was a great regression. The Middle Ages were a great regression for Europe. And she's basically saying that right now, the question isn't, do we have socialism or capitalism? The question is, will capitalism in Europe lead to something like the fall of the Roman Empire? Will this savagery of imperialism lead to Europe breaking down into a state of barbarism? Right? That is what she's writing about. And what's interesting is that she is saying the exact opposite of what Friedrich Nietzsche is saying. Friedrich Nietzsche says that that's good. He says that Europe is losing all of the Christianity that was just a revolt of the weak against the strong. It's losing all of the laws that are made to restrain the great men from their greatness. Nietzsche writes about what he calls the blonde beast, the white man who is going into the third world and being a savage and slaughtering black and brown people and robbing them and killing them. And he says this is great because we're getting back to might is right. We're getting back to a society that worships strength, that doesn't believe in these moral pretenses that are imposed by the weak to restrain the strong. So what Nietzsche liked with the rise of colonialism, the increasingly moving toward the law of the jungle, what Nietzsche liked, Rosa Luxemburg sees as the seeds of civilization falling apart. And this is fascinating stuff. With the rise of imperialism, we see an end of morality, right? And this is a point I've made many, many times. But on the wall of the U.S. Department of Justice, there is a phrase that is written. And I remember when I worked in D.C., I would walk by the Department of Justice on my way to my office. And on the wall, I would read the words, "Where the law stops, tyranny begins." Now think about where law stops, tyranny begins. What does that mean? Right? We're Marxists, right? We hate the courts because they oppress poor people. We're mad at the police, so we can't agree with that. Well, actually, you can. Right? Where law stops, tyranny begins. Law and morality are the only two things that prevent the strong from completely ruling over the weak. Without law and without morality, it just becomes the law of the jungle. The strongest survive, right? Law and morality are the only mechanisms that our society has to protect the weak from the strong. And unfortunately, our laws tend to be written by the strong, so they're not exactly fair. And we don't pretend that there's equal justice under the law or any of that. We know we live in a hierarchical society. But when you get rid of law entirely. When you get rid of morality entirely, you get the law of the jungle, where just the strongest survive, right? Whoever has the gold makes the rules. Whoever's got the biggest gun, whoever's the strongest, can do whatever they want. And what we saw with the rise of imperialism was that European society was degenerating into the law of the jungle. We're the British. We can come to India and we can burn all your textile looms and force you to import your cloth from Britain. What are you going to do about it? We got a bigger gun. We control the world economy. Oh, you want to fight about it? We'll just slaughter whole villages and kill you all. There's no moral pretense there. There's no moral justification for acting that way, but they do it because it's the law of the jungle. Might is right. Right? The employer says to the worker, hey, I'll pay you 2 cents an hour. The employee says, but I can't work for 2 cents an hour. And he says, oh, well, then I just won't hire you. I'll hire somebody else who will work for 2 cents an hour. What? You got a problem about that? What are you going to do? I own the company. You don't. Screw you. There's no moral pretense there. It's just the law of the jungle, right? And that capitalism, and especially as capitalism developed into imperialism, it started stripping away any moralistic pretense, stripping away any legal pretense, and degenerating into a form of barbarism, where the guys with the biggest guns and the guys with the gold made the rules, and they didn't pretend to be moral, and they didn't pretend to write a legal code and set up courts, and they didn't pretend any of that, right? And that imperialism, even though it was centralizing wealth in the hands of a lot of European corporations and multinationals, it was leading European civilization to come apart. And we're seeing this now in the United States. During World War II, there were a lot of American capitalists who loved Hitler, right? Henry Ford had gotten the Iron Cross from Hitler and gotten a medal from Hitler. And, a lot of American capitalists loved Hitler. And thank you, Kurt, for your super chat. But after World War II started, after Pearl Harbor happened, they understood, all right, we're at war with the Germans. So it doesn't matter if we personally like Hitler. We have to support our country. And they were forced to organize production for war. And there were exceptions to this. IBM was still running the punch card machine for the Holocaust. There's a great book exposing that, IBM and the Holocaust. But, Walt Disney was a Nazi sympathizer. But then when World War II started, he started making propaganda films against the Nazis. Why? Because he was loyal to the United States. He was, there was this understanding among the wealthiest capitalists that you might have one opinion, but at the end of the day, your financial interest in the short term might be more in line with the Nazis or whatever. But, you have this obligation to be loyal to the homeland, to be loyal to the country, to fight the Nazis. Well, we don't have that no more. Right? I mean, we don't have that anymore. Increasingly, the capitalists say, I got my own interest. Why do I have any obligation? Right? And increasingly, we see things all throughout U.S. society that look more and more like the law of the jungle, where even among the capitalists, they just do whatever they want. They just do whatever is convenient for them. Right? There's a big division in the ruling class about Russia. There's a big division in the ruling class about China. Obama negotiated the Iran nuclear deal. He made a deal in the name of the United States because he thought it would strategically benefit the United States. But Donald Trump, he got in there and he said, well, it might benefit Obama's friends, doesn't benefit me. And he ripped up the Iran nuclear deal. He erased it. That wouldn't have happened 30 or 40 years ago because they would have understood we have one national interest, right? They were loyal to this notion of America, this collective notion of advancing the country. They don't feel that way anymore. Right. And increasingly, we see the polarization between red states and blue states. We look at January 6th. The United States is deteriorating more and more into barbarism, because even the morality or law that held U.S. society together, it gets in the way of might is right. Every capitalist is looking out for his own interest. Every region is looking out for itself. And we're seeing this overall deterioration, that all the pretenses are being stripped away. And this is what she was talking about. And as Rome was falling apart, they used to joke, at one, the Roman Empire divided into two, and then it divided again. And after a while, they joked that all you needed to be a Roman emperor was to have your face on a coin. Anyone in Europe could put their face on a coin and say, I'm the emperor of Rome. And they'd have two or three, some local area would recognize them. That increasingly the Roman Empire just came apart because different interests pulled it one way, pulled it another way. And in Rome, at the end of the Roman Empire, they were fighting what they called the barbarians, or the barbarians. And who were the barbarians? They were Germans. right? They were the Germans, the various German tribes, Goths and Huns, and what were they? Goths and Ostrogoths and Visigoths and Huns and Vandals. They were fighting them. But it got to the point that Rome couldn't even put its own army together, right? Rome was, whole story of the Roman Empire was a military city-state. They were really good at having a military. But towards the end, you know, the Roman emperor would get out there and he would say, guys, we need to go fight the barbarians. And the Romans would say, screw you. I'm not going to go get killed to fight no barbarians. No, I got an orgy to go to. I got a party to go to. I got some drinking to do. So the Romans couldn't even raise their own army. They didn't have enough centralization, enough coherence within the Roman city-state to actually raise their own army. So they ended up having to hire other Germans to fight the German tribes they were fighting. And at the end, Rome didn't even have its own army. It didn't have its own army. It had to hire other people throughout its empire, kind of like what the United States is doing now with green card soldiers. Have you looked at that? Increasingly, U.S. soldiers are not from the United States. They're people from South America that we want to give visas to. Because if you ask average American kids, hey, do you want to go fight for America? They go, screw you. I'm not fighting for Joe Biden. I'm not fighting for Trump. And increasingly, the United States is having to find people from, you know, from South America to say, we'll give you a green card if you fight for America, because we don't have a central vision. We don't have a central vision anymore. U.S. society is crumbling internally, right? And on the one hand, it's good to see the mythology and the nationalism that held U.S. society together coming apart. But on the other hand, if it's not going to lead to something better, if it's just going to lead to barbarism, that's not good either. Right? We need to replace the United States as it currently exists with a higher plane. We need socialism, socialism with American characteristics. The USA needs to be reborn on socialist principles. But if it doesn't, it's just going to further deteriorate. And it's going to go the way of Rome. And we're going to depopulate here in the United States. We're already depopulating. Living standards are going down. Life expectancy is going down, right? We're already depopulating, and, you know, it will balkanize and we'll just deteriorate further into barbarism. And this is the natural conclusion of imperialism. The global system of imperialism, capitalism in its monopoly stage, leads to the degeneration of societies into barbarism. And that's what Rosa Luxemburg is saying in her historic statement. So it's not like we have a choice individually. It's that ultimately, the capitalist crisis in the center of the empire is going to either lead to further degeneration into barbarism and the breaking up of the United States and Europe, or it will lead to the rise of socialism. And I think there's a very good chance we could see the rise of socialism because of China, and because of Russia, and because of Venezuela, and because of Iran, and because of Cuba. There is already an anti-imperialist bloc of countries that don't have capitalism. And so the United States breaking up into barbarism would mean that not only would our economy have to continue to degenerate, but then somehow we would have to be blocked from joining the economy that is growing. The Chinese economy is growing. The Russian economy is growing. The economy of the Bolivarian countries is growing. The BRICS are growing. And it would be in the economic interest of much of the American capitalist class not to allow the country to further deteriorate, but instead to simply have the United States transition into joining the Belt and Road, joining the Eurasian Economic Union, and being part of the new alternative global economic order. So that's my hope. However, that would get in the way of the power of the big monopolies. And this is the issue. The big monopolies, right? The big oil bankers, the big oil corporations, the big banks, the Silicon Valley elites, they don't want that new economy. They don't care about the United States degenerating into barbarism. They don't care about Europe degenerating into barbarism as long as they can stay the global middleman. They don't want the world to continue developing because they don't build things. They don't build roads. They don't build highways. They don't build steel. They don't manufacture things. All they do is they are the middleman, and they lend money, and people buy their oil from them, and everyone continues to get poorer, and they continue soaking in the profits. So they don't care if the United States continues to deteriorate into barbarism. They don't care. So the United States breaking out of the decaying imperialist system would require the United States breaking out of imperialism. It would require a block of people in the United States. It would be a lot of working class people who are tired of seeing their wages go down, tired of seeing instability in their communities, who want better jobs and healthcare and education for their kids and for their communities. And it would probably include a lot of capitalists in America, store owners, industrialists, others who want the economy of the USA to be strong and want a government that is investing in the country and stabilizing the economy. And it would involve that alternative economy, Russia and China and Venezuela, and the alternative economy that's emerging that is based on economic growth. And it would involve a block emerging within U.S. society to beat back the imperialists, the big monopolies. Right? And that's what would ultimately have to happen. Just like in China, they kicked out the imperialists with a block of 4 classes, right? On the Chinese flag, you have the big star, and that's the Chinese Communist Party. And then it's representing 4 smaller stars. That's the block of 4 classes: the peasantry, the workers, the middle class, and the national capitalist class, all led by the Communist Party with its proletarian ideology. Right? You had to have an anti-imperialist block of 4 classes. Well, if we're going to defeat the imperialists and prevent the United States from degenerating further into barbarism, we need a block of different classes. We need the working class. We need the small business owners. We need the industrialists. There's going to be a different layers of U.S. society that have an economic interest in seeing America prosper as a country, because the imperialists at this point don't have an economic interest in seeing the United States prosper. The poorer the United States gets, the richer they are, because they're based in this global free trade system. They are the global middleman in trade. They are not concerned about the United States getting wealthier. They are concerned about maintaining their global monopoly. So if a solid anti-imperialist bloc were to emerge within the United States that was aligned with the anti-imperialist countries, had the working class and the labor movement at the center of it, people like Chris Smalls fighting the giant monopoly of Amazon, right? If the bloc were to form, and that bloc took power in Washington, D.C. and was elected or was able to take power and started nationalizing the banks and nationalizing the oil companies and restructuring the economy so that it benefited the working class of America and was friendly and doing business with Russia and China and Venezuela and the anti-imperialist bloc of countries, that would benefit the United States, and it would end the dissension into barbarism. However, if the imperialists continue to rule the United States, if the Silicon Valley fascists and the big oil bankers and the intelligence apparatus and those forces continue to dominate the United States, we will see a further degeneration into barbarism, because that is not a problem for them. Right. And this is what Rosa Luxemburg was getting at. And I'm glad somebody asked about it, because I was getting canceled and attacked on Twitter earlier today for saying we need an anti-imperialist bloc to beat back the power of the big monopolies. And this is what we ultimately need, right? That we are in a period where imperialist homelands like the United States, like Britain, like France, like Germany, are deteriorating into barbarism. Britain is ready to balkanize. Scotland's going to break away. Wales might break away. I mean, Britain is falling apart, right? The United States is falling apart. The Western imperialist homelands are coming apart because the imperialists are loyal to their global system of trade. They're not loyal to the homeland. But the economic interest of the homeland is with the global economy. And this is what I'm getting at. And this is what we have to stand for. And this is what 21st century socialism is about. And this is what socialism around the world is about. Now, the Western left are just people being programmed and manipulated by the algorithms to be the hit squad of the big monopolies, to kind of kick around the domestic capitalists, keep them in line. So that's different. But I'm glad you asked me about the Rosa Luxemburg and the piece about socialism or barbarism, because ultimately she was very much foreseeing the circumstances that we are currently living under and that I am constantly talking about. So there you go. All right. How is China a socialist economy with a market economy? How is China a socialist country with a market economy? For the following reasons. Socialism is defined by Frederick Engels as the anarchy of production. Or later, Frederick Engels, he says, under capitalism, I'm sorry, not socialism. Capitalism is defined by Frederick Engels as the anarchy of production. Frederick Engels also later describes it as saying that under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. Meaning that if you have a factory that makes coats, it doesn't make those coats because people need to wear them. It makes those coats because it's profitable to make those coats. If you have a store that's selling computers, doesn't sell those computers because people need computers. It sells those computers because it's profitable to do so. And on top of that, people only have jobs if a capitalist can make profits from their labor, right? And you only work so long as a capitalist can make profits off of hiring you. And so we have an economy where profits are in command and the anarchy of production persists. And you get problems like, homeless people amid a huge amount of empty houses and housing units here in New York City. You get, poverty amid plenty. You get people that are hungry because there's too much food. You get people that are homeless because there are too many houses, because food isn't distributed because people are hungry. Food is distributed so that agribusiness and big box stores can make money from it. Housing isn't distributed because people need a place to live. Housing is distributed so that you can make money from it. Right. And it's the rule of profits. Profits are in command. That's capitalism. China's economy does not work that way. There are a lot of for-profit corporations in China, but they don't have freedom. Those for-profit corporations have no rights. And at any point, the Chinese Communist Party can show up at those for-profit corporations and say, you do this, you do that, and they have no choice. They have to do it. On top of that, most of those for-profit corporations get a subsidy from the government. The Chinese government gives them money to tell them what to do. And on top of that, their primary business partner is the Chinese government. China has roughly 50% state-owned industries. Half of the industries in China are state-owned. Banking and the lending of money is controlled by the Chinese government. The Chinese government says this bank, lend to this person, lend to that person. And they have 5-year economic plans in China. 5-year economic plans where the government sits down and they say, what do we want to happen in the next 5 years? And they make a plan and they say, we need this to happen. We need the chips and computer chips section of the economy to grow. We need this many sewage facilities to be built. We need this much electricity. We need to expand our electrical capacity this much. We need this much railway. We need to pave roads in this area. They write a 5-year economic plan. And then the Communist Party forces both the state sector and the private sector to enact the plan. That is not capitalism. And yes, there is a market. And yes, those market forces, those private companies make money, but they don't make money just doing whatever is profitable for them in the short term. They are controlled by the party. They are subsidized by the party. They are directed by the party. And their primary trading partner is the government. Huawei Technologies is the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. It is technically a cooperative under Chinese law. It's a private company that engages in profit sharing, right, where the employees are shareholders, etc. But Huawei does not function according to the market. Huawei Technologies, its primary business partner is the military. The board of directors has members of the Chinese military that are on the board. On top of that, Huawei frequently is told, we need you to build telecommunications here, and they do it, right? So it's technically private. It's a market mechanism, but it doesn't function according to market laws, right? The logic of the market with its boom-bust cycle does not apply to China. And the reason for that is because of the fact that in China, the market is not in command. And this question from Tahuni: the rise of the USSR benefited labor conditions of U.S. workers. Why hasn't the rise of China had the same impact? Because of the fact that the USSR, when its economy was rising, the Western capitalist economy was in chaos. Well, actually, first of all, that's not even, let me back up. All right. I'm sorry. My mind slipped there for a minute. So you're saying the rise of the USSR benefited the labor conditions of U.S. workers. Why isn't the rise of China having the same effect? That's not exactly true about the USSR. The rise of living standards and the rise of the USSR's economy started in 1928. It was from 1928 until World War II that the Soviet Union, was having its boom of industrialization. At that point, living conditions in Western countries were decreasing. The Great Depression was happening, mass unemployment, people were starving on the streets, and conditions in the United States were deteriorating during that time. So that's not accurate, right? Now, there were, economic reforms that were won because you had a labor movement in the United States that was aligned with the Soviet Union. You had a labor movement and a communist party, and you had mass struggle in the streets and organizing against capitalism. Yeah, that was happening. But the actual basic conditions of the U.S. working class in the 1930s was not good, and it was getting worse throughout the 1930s. It was until after World War II that living conditions in the United States went up, and that was because of the post-World War II economic expansion, which is the greatest episode of economic growth in all of human history. After World War II, every major city and every major country in the Western world had been destroyed by the war, and the United States had not been destroyed. So the United States industries had the monopoly. And they started selling steel to the whole world, selling cars to the whole world, selling refrigerators to the whole world. They were supplying the world with products, and U.S. industry was booming. And because of the fact that U.S. industry was booming and that you had a labor movement, so you had labor unions that could negotiate higher wages and force the bosses to pay higher wages, and you had a global economic expansion that was happening in the aftermath of the mass destruction of World War II, living conditions could go up. But that's not the situation that we're in today. Right now, we're facing a long-term crisis of overproduction, just like during the 1930s. And because of this long-term crisis of overproduction, living standards in the West are going down. Meanwhile, China, a country that does not have the boom-bust cycle, where technology does not lead to greater poverty, you don't have poverty amid abundance, right? That as technology increases, living standards in China increase, China is doing better. So really, this is comparable to the 1930s. During the 1930s, the Western capitalist countries were seeing their living standards go down, and the Soviet Union was seeing its living standards go up. That's what we're seeing right now. In the Western capitalist countries, living standards are going down, and in China, a socialist country, living standards are going up. So that's the issue there. It's comparable to the 1930s. Now, if there was some big war and, a bunch of the world got blown up and the United States didn't get blown up, I could see U.S. living standards start to go up again. We obviously hope that doesn't happen, especially because there'd be nukes involved this time. But yeah, that's the issue there. And then that was China related, so I thought I'd answer it. Someone's asking, who was the French equivalent of Lenin or Luxembourg during the 1900s? And my answer is, I do not know. I have not studied the history of French communism. I know a little bit about the revolt of 1968 and the May of 1968 events in France, the communist uprising that happened in France during those years. And I also know a little bit about the 1930s and the Popular Front government and some of the Popular Front against fascism in France during the late 1930s. But I have no idea about France before the Russian Revolution. I know there was syndicalism in France. I know that there was social democracy in France. Eventually, you had the French Communist Party, but I have no idea who was playing that kind of role. I'm sure that there was somebody. William Z. Foster was playing the role of Lenin before the Bolshevik Revolution in the United States. His Syndicalist League of North America had developed Leninist policies. They bored from within. They went into the existing unions to spread revolutionary politics. They practiced ironclad discipline, democratic centralism. And William Z. Foster and his followers in America were engaging in what seemed a lot like Bolshevik methods. Now, unfortunately, there was an element of Sorelianism mixed in with it, propaganda of the deed, the cult of action and Malthusian, neo-Malthusianism and birth strike. So it wasn't exactly correct. It wasn't exactly Leninist. But William Z. Foster in pre-World War I America was arriving at Leninist and Bolshevik conclusions. Whereas I don't know who was playing that role in pre-World War I France. I don't know. All right. Is there a such thing as unproductive labor? And does it make a difference in how the labor movement organizes? Well, yes. All right. Marx's writing on surplus value and labor generally applies to production. It applies to people making goods in factories. And in Capital, Marx describes how half of the working class in Britain at the time that he's writing is not productive. They are not involved in productive labor. right? The servants in the houses of the rich people, not involved in productive labor. The guys who clean the stables and look after the rich people's horses, not productive labor, right? The butlers, not productive labor. The the guys who sweep the streets, not productive labor, right? There's all kinds of, he said half of the wage workers in Britain are not involved at the point of production. They are not creating surplus value in a factory. That's what that means, right? That if you are in a factory and you're on an assembly line creating a product, you are putting value into that product, and that product comes out at the end of the assembly line. And it is your human labor that puts the value into the product. Machines do not create value. They are dead. They are dead capital, right? It is only human labor that puts the value into it. And the capitalist can only exploit human labor at the point of production. And this is the reason for the tendency of the rate of profits to fall. As the role of the worker in production is diminished, the rate of profit that the capitalist can make off of each product goes down. So he's forced to make more products because the amount of profit, the percentage of profit that he gets goes down. The less the worker is involved in production, the less profits the capitalist can make, because the profits that the capitalists make can only come through exploiting labor, because only human labor creates value, right? And this is a problem in the capitalist system, and it exacerbates the already existing problem of overproduction, which is the worker never gets paid enough to buy back what he makes, right? The worker can never afford to buy back what he makes. On top of that, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, the role of human labor being diminished, leads to exacerbating this problem, because the rate of profit that the capitalist makes on each product goes down when the role of the worker in the process of production decreases. So most of what Marx was talking about, with the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, with the problem of overproduction, with surplus value, most of what he's writing about applies to workers that are involved in factory production. And non-productive labor refers to employees who are engaged in performing services for capitalists, right? Capitalist hires somebody to clean his house. A capitalist hires somebody to make food for him. The capitalist government hires people to sweep the streets. The capitalist government hires teachers to teach in the schools and facilitate education. All of these are forms of labor that are considered non-productive because they are not involved in producing surplus value or value that goes into a product. And that organizing at the point of production in a factory is quite different than organizing teachers or organizing street sweepers or organizing other employees. Because, one of the big demands, for example, of the labor movement historically, of industrial workers, has been open the books. They want to see the profit margin that the capitalists are making and demand that they get a bigger share of it. And the capitalists, when the capitalists, don't want to sign a union contract, don't want to raise the workers' wages, they'll often say to the workers, it won't be profitable if I do that. So historically, workers have demanded transparency. They say, open the books. Let us see how much you make off of every car, and we'll see if we're getting our fair share of it. Well, the demand to open the books doesn't make sense when you're organizing street sweepers or teachers, because the books are already there. It's the public budget. It's the government that's hiring them, right? The demand of open the books doesn't exactly make the same amount of sense, when the capitalist is hiring someone to clean his house, right? He's show me your income. It doesn't make the same kind of thing. The capitalist isn't turning the person he hires to clean his house or clean his stables or take care of his kids. He's not hiring them to make surplus value and profits from their labor. Instead, he's hiring them to perform a service. So yes, there are differences in how you organize service sector workers rather than workers who are organized at the point of production. And organized at the point of production, those workers are directly involved in creating surplus value. That's the issue there. So I hope that answered your question, Christian. All right. The last question I've got here is the role of finance capital in the transition from feudalism to mercantilism to capitalism. How do countries deal with natural resources and in the transition to socialism? So it's really two questions. And if people have more questions, please, keep the super chats rolling in. I'm here to answer your questions. We've been almost 2 hours. We got like 12 minutes left, and then it'll be 2 hours. So this is a decent stream tonight. More laid back, more chill, but that's fine. But So the role of finance capital in the transition from feudalism to mercantilism to capitalism. Well, in feudalism, the lending of money is illegal, right? The Catholic Church forbid lending money at interest. It's called usury. And, money, you weren't allowed to have it. There's a reason they called it filthy lucre. It was a sin for a peasant to touch money, right? Because the Catholic Church said money is sinful. A peasant could live his whole life without ever seeing a coin, without ever seeing money, because it was considered a sinful thing to ever even touch it. Right. And in feudalism, there's not much role for money. The peasant goes out and he does the crops and he gets to keep some of it. And then the rest, goes to the landowner. The blacksmith goes out and makes pieces of metal for the landowner. Right. I mean, the soldier, there's not, you can do it all without money in feudalism. Right. Everyone just kind of gets their, they get their piece of food, they get their share of the meat or share of the crop, and everyone kind of gets what they need. And there's no role for money except trade. Right. With trade, there is a role for money. Right. If Marco Polo is coming in from China and he's bringing these spices and these silks, he's not going to give it to you for free. He needs something in exchange. So he needs money, right? And as the Silk Road developed from Asia, that was laying the basis for the beginning of the overthrow of feudalism, because that class, those guys who were going to Asia or going to India to get spices or to get silk or to get luxury items, things that only kings could afford, those guys needed currency. They needed money. You had to give them something. You couldn't just, tell them to go and do it. You had to give them something. And often the mercantile, this is a new class. The merchants are a new class. They're not landowners. They're not serfs. They're not peasants. They're not craftsmen. They're traders. They're merchants. They're going to some place and they're bringing something. And often, back then, there's no high-speed trains. There's no airplanes. There's no automobiles. It's a lot harder to travel. They have to get on a ship. They have to go. It takes a really long time. They have to, go on horseback or by camel across thousands of miles. Often they need to have their journey financed ahead of time, right? Somebody's got to pay them to, the king wants you to go to India to get him a bunch of spices. All right. And you're like, okay, I'll do that for you, king. But in order to do that, you gotta pay for, me to have, the ship I need stuff along the way. And when I get there, I have to give them something for these spices. They can't just give it to me. So my journey has to be financed ahead of time. So suddenly you need there to be a money lender, right? So somebody's got to put up the money, right? And in Venice, right, the Venetians, right, that was in Venice. Right. And at first, the way it was set up was that only Jews could do it. And that was the basis of anti-Semitism. Right. It was that, well, Jews, they're allowed to be Jews. They were the one group. Muslims were forced to convert or they got killed. Pagans were forced to convert or they got killed. But because Jews, they're in the Bible and all of that, Jews were allowed to just be Jews. So they changed the laws in Venice and some other places and in Britain and elsewhere. And they said, okay, Jews, you can be the people who lend the money. But you have to be separate from everybody else. You're walled off from the rest of the society in the ghetto. We're going to make propaganda. We're going to tell all of society that you're sinful, awful people. You don't have good Christian morals. We're going to segregate you. We're going to castigate you. We're going to make everyone hate you, right? And you're going to be in this special walled off area so that when the king needs some money, right, he then uses you to finance the merchants. Right. And that was the role of the Jew in feudalism. The Jew was a group of people, just like, if you were a blacksmith, you inherited that from your father who was a blacksmith, just like if you were a basket weaver and you inherited that from your father who was a basket weaver. In the Middle Ages, they picked one group of people, the Jews, and their job was to handle the money. And that was how the Middle Ages were set up. And they were mistreated on account of that. Every time there was an economic problem, they would mobilize all the peasants to go and kill all the Jews and have a pogrom and be brutal lynchings and burn their houses. And it was awful. right? And there was brutal oppression of Jews on that basis, and they were kind of scapegoated for the country's economic problems. But they were in feudal society because of the Catholic Church, because they were the one group that wasn't forced to convert to Christianity. They got assigned the task of handling money. And so because of the rising mercantile class, you needed to have, in addition to that, you needed to have financiers, right? And so the Catholic Church was forced to change its rules that no one could lend money at interest. And you had the beginning of finance. And if you look at some of the work of who is it? It wasn't Leonardo da Vinci, was it? Or was it Michelangelo or one of those Italian sculptors? He did paintings of bankers because they were considered great people, because they were enabling progress, right? Without the bankers putting up the money and financing it, you couldn't have Marco Polo going to Italy. You couldn't have trade routes. They were pioneers. They were advancing human progress, right? And a lot of the early Renaissance art is very positive about bankers, right? It's like bankers, financiers are great people. They're heroes. They're innovators. They believe in new technology. They're on a lot of the great, Bach, Beethoven, people like that. They had kind of an admiration for the financier, because the financier was seen, not Beethoven, that was years later, but the financier was seen as somebody who was advancing the economy, right? And the financiers existed, but they were kind of controlled. They were under the boot heel of the king. Feudalism controlled the financiers, right? That they existed and they were there for the financiers. But as that mercantile class grew, and the merchants kind of moved into production, those who had made a lot of money from being merchants, they started saying, well, we can have factories and produce products. And so the mercantile class started turning into the early capitalist class. And they had a relationship with the financiers, right? And there was a relationship between the mercantile class as it's becoming the industrial capitalist class and the financiers as they're the financiers. Eventually, the mercantile capitalist class overthrew feudalism. The French Revolution, the English Civil War, feudalism is being overthrown. The financiers were in an alliance with the capitalist class because the capitalists need someone to lend them money to facilitate capitalism. So that's the relationship there, is that the mercantile class, the traders, became the industrialists. And in order to facilitate them being the mercantile class, they needed the financiers. Right. And there you go. But and that's where this anti-Semitic stereotype that Jews are money lenders, that's where it comes from. Shakespeare wrote a horrendously anti-Semitic play called The Merchant of Venice. Right. And it's about this idea that the Jew is a money lender, et cetera. Right. That's where that comes from. Right. But you'll notice that starting in the 1800s, once, capitalism was emerging, all kinds of people that were not Jewish got involved in banking. Right? The Rockefellers, right? The Rockefellers started out as running Standard Oil, and they became a huge oil monopoly. But then they had all this money. They became bankers. The Morgans, right? Henry Morgan, he was this big industrial capitalist, but then he had all this money, so he became a banker. And that as, a lot of the wealthy industrial capitalists, they became bankers. And if you look at the various families in high finance, most of them are not Jewish, right? But that stereotype of Jewish bankers that's used in anti-Semitic propaganda, that goes back to the Middle Ages. And the reason that the Nazis were using that is because the Nazis were all about trying to restore feudalism. They were into degrowth. The idea was that history's gone too far. We've advanced. We've lost our morality. So we're going to roll back history. We're going to create an idyllic medieval society where everyone knows their place and we love our German homeland and there's honor. And so anti-Semitism fit into that, because in medieval Europe, the Jew is the outsider who's the money lender, who's like castigated by society. And so the Nazis, their anti-Semitism was rooted in their desire to recreate the Middle Ages, to go back to feudalism. They were into Wagner music, and they were trying to impose the feudal discipline onto capitalist society, right? As part of their, capitalism in Germany, like the rest of the world, was highly unstable during the 1930s. You had big economic crises, etc. And there's mass unemployment. And the idea is, communists are saying, let's march into the future, right? Let's take control of the means of production and unleash human growth and productivity to march to a higher plane. Fascism is saying, well, no, we're going to bring back order and discipline and honor and chivalry in the Middle Ages, and we're going to go backward. Right. And part of going backward was stripping Jews of their citizenship, isolating Jews from the rest of society. And that went with, the creation of a slave labor concentration camp system. That went with the excessive promotion of the military, because in the Middle Ages, the military was a much bigger part of society. It was like that was what kept society in order. It was the knights and the military. Right. So Nazism and its anti-Semitism was rooted in nostalgia for the Middle Ages, and that ultimately fascism is about going backward. It is about degrowth. That's what it's about. Fascism is about degrowth, and it's about trying to go backward. It's trying to, it's like, imagine that, capitalism is like this destructive genie that's been unleashed. Right. Communism says, well, we want to go to a higher stage, right? Fascism says we want to stuff the genie back into the bottle. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to just, stuff the genie back into the bottle by recreating feudalism, right? By recreating a society where everyone knows their place. There's no class struggle. There's no strikes. There's blood and soil and honor and all of that. That's fascism. It is about historical regression. It's about moving backward to try and save capitalism. That's what fascism is. And that's why they have this obsession with the Jewish banker and anti-Semitism and all of that. So I hope that that's helpful in your first question. The second question is, and if anyone has any more questions, this is a two-part question. This is the last question I've got. So if anyone has any more questions, by all means, throw them my way. How do countries with natural resources transition to socialism? Or how do countries without natural resources, rather, transition to socialism? Well, you don't have to have natural resources to transition to socialism, right? I mean, socialism is a system where the economy functions for the good of society, not for the profits of private owners. It is where the means of production are controlled by society and rationally organized. Frederick Engels describes production upon a predetermined plan. And the social ownership of the means of production, rational control. Marx says that the proletariat takes control of the government, wins the battle for democracy, and centralizes the instruments of production in the hands of the state, and then raises the productive forces of society. So if a country didn't have a lot of natural resources, but it had a lot of factories, those factories would be put under public ownership and then organized to serve public good. Right. In a society where you didn't have a lot of natural resources, but you had a big agricultural sector, those farms would be put under public ownership and, operated for the good of society. Right. That socialism is very possible in a society. However, socialism is about economic growth, and often socialist societies really need foreign investment in order to advance. Right. If you have socialism in a very, very poor, underdeveloped country where you barely have any industry and factories, you're going to need to build up your productive forces. So you might need to enter a joint venture with an American company. You might need to have a company from Britain or from India set up shop in your country and have a joint venture so that a state enterprise partners with a foreign enterprise, right? In order to build up your productive forces. When I look at Zimbabwe, for example, Zimbabwe doesn't have very much industry. Right. It's a very poor country. It used to be just giant swaths of farmland owned by mostly white farmers. Well, they've redistributed the farmland, but they don't have very much industry. Well, the diamond mines are under public ownership, so the diamond mines are public. But ultimately, Zimbabwe is trying to work with China to get industry into Zimbabwe. Because, in Zimbabwe, in a very poor country where most of the population are black people that have been deeply impoverished and basically just exploited by those white farmers, if you simply redistribute the land of the white farmers and you just have a bunch of farmland. Okay. And now the black people are getting some of the profits from the farmland, or some of it's going into the state budget. It's nationalized. But at the end of the day, you still haven't raised the country out of poverty. You need to build up industries. So that's why China has been so close to Zimbabwe, right? Zimbabwe is an underdeveloped socialist country, but through trading with China, building up industries, they can increase their level of productive forces, right? Their natural resource, their diamonds are publicly owned. Angola, that's a socialist country, but they have a lot of oil. And they have oil, but they don't have very many other industries. And that one of the great things about Isabel dos Santos, who was the leader of the state-run oil company, is she was making sure that the proceeds from the state-run oil company went back into the domestic economy of Angola to build up the productive forces, because that's one of the problems Venezuela has had. All they had was oil, and so their socialism was simply based on the export of their natural resources. And you can use that, but it's not enough. That's why Gaddafi was obsessed with building the great man-made river. He built the world's largest irrigation system because he wanted them to produce their own food, because he knew if there was a crisis on the oil markets, they would starve. And so he built the great man-made river so that their agricultural output would increase, right? And that this is what a socialist economy, right, is about, is that ultimately, if you have a deeply impoverished country, socialism is about raising the productive forces by using state central planning. But if your country is deeply impoverished, you might need foreign investment. So there you go. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, it's interesting. On this live, we got really into economics, which is good because economics is super important. That's what all of this is all about. We've talked about fascist economics. We've talked about socialist economics. We talked about the overthrow of feudalism and capitalism. This is all very important. That's what I like talking about, because ultimately socialism is about economics. It is not a cultural movement. It is not an aesthetic. Socialism and fascism are both about economics. And we are heading toward fascism right now. The degrowth cult, they want to do what the Nazis did. They want to try to shove the genie back in the bottle and build this highly mechanized authoritarian capitalism to degrow and drive down living standards and decrease productive forces. And we have to resist that. So there you go. There you go, folks. All right. Well, it's been a great stream. I'll be back tomorrow night. It's been fun. Yeah, Johnny Blaze liked the part about non-productive labor. So there you go. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, everybody. Be well.